we are very happy to bring several important visitors with us today to speak about how Michigan Townships can help our small businesses as they seek to recover from the COVID-19 crisis and continue to become important parts of our community's quality of life, employment, and other economic factors that are just as important to us as our health. So today with me, I have Rob Fowler. Rob is the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan. I'd like to ask Rob to introduce himself a little bit further.
Well, thank you, Neil. Thanks for having me. I'm the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan, a business membership organization in the state. We're not the SBA. I always feel like I need to say that sometimes early on in a conversation. We are a business membership organization, Chamber of Commerce-like. We have 28,000 members. We are the largest of our type in the country. We're led by a 25-member board of directors, all of whom are small business owners in our state. One of whom in our past recently was Neil Sheridan, your executive director. So Neil knows a lot about us. So that's who we are.
Well, thank you, Rob. Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. I worked with Rob for about the past 10 years, 5 years as an SBA board member. I've been a township official in Michigan for about 11 years, and this all happened at the same time. So I have a very strong interest in economic development and strengthening our communities. And one of the things I did with Rob, he's going to speak a little bit about later, was to work together with another group on writing a policy strategy that we presented last year to the governor and is being adopted. In fact, one of my co-authors on that is now the state treasurer. So we're hopeful that these are good signs for advancing that. And that really is a community-focused, entrepreneurship-led economic development approach, which is, I think, in many ways a strong way for those small businesses to recover. And I won't steal Rob's thunder. So also with us today, we have two of the leaders of the township government in Meridian. We have the township manager and the township associate township manager, both who are professionals with deep experience in growing not just Meridian, but other communities. And I'd like them to introduce themselves. First, Frank Walsh, township manager, Meridian Township.
Thank you, Neil, and welcome everyone. I'm the manager of Meridian Township, which is located in Ingham County, approximately 6-7 miles from the state capital. We are adjacent to Michigan State University, population of about 43,000. And in my previous tenure, I was the city manager of St. Joseph down on Michigan, down by the Indiana border for about 17 years. And prior to that, in Cedar Springs for about 6 years, located in Kent County, just north of Grand Rapids. And at a very young age, I was actually a township trustee back in the 80s. I'm in Henrietta Township, which is located in Jackson County. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for the opportunity to the MTA and Neil.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you for your service to MTA. Frank is one of the leading contributors to our township managers subgroup, and we work and meet regularly. And thank you again for your participation in that too, Frank. So with him, we have Derek Perry. Derek is the assistant township manager. He's also the director of the Public Works and Engineering Department for Meridian Township, which has many important initiatives underway.
Good afternoon, everyone, and I do appreciate you having me in on this panelist today. A little background: I've been in local government for about 25 years, 5 years here with Meridian. Before that, worked actually with Frank in the city of St. Joe, city of Marshall, so a little bit of variety. City of Sturgis, Stevensville, even did an interim job as a county road director for a while.
You know, our content today is really driven towards all townships. We've spoken about how we can think about methods that large and small townships can use to support small businesses. My own background is that I was a township official in Groveland Township, which is about 3,500 people in northern Oakland County. And then currently I live in Williamson Township, which is also bordering on Meridian Township. Frank, I'm disappointed you didn't mention that. Population also about 3,500. But let's proceed. I want to sort of frame our discussion today. And that is, you know, as a township organization, and especially because we range in size, there's kind of a variety of things we can do and some we can't do because perhaps our township is too small, or we don't have the staff, or we don't have the experience in doing some of these more complicated economic development activities. So what we're talking about today are going to be a broad range of ideas that we've asked other township leaders to submit for today, as well as when we get to it, we'll have a chance to have you ask your questions using the chat function, as we mentioned before. I'd like to turn it over to Rob. Rob, you know, this is a very interesting organization. The Small Business Association of Michigan is not the Chamber of Commerce, which in Michigan, the state chamber largely is comprised of the largest corporations in the state, although smaller chambers of commerce belong to the state chamber, but they also belong to SBAM. Why is that?
Well, in so many ways, we are an organization of organizations whose members are small businesses. We have 35 strategic partners. They are chambers of commerce and other associations whose, you know, predominantly their members are small businesses. So bar owners and bowling alleys and golf course owners tend to be the kind of strategic partners. So yes, I mean, we work very closely with local chambers of commerce and sort of vertical trade associations who are mostly small businesses.
All right, Rob, I would like to turn over the floor to you, and we have, I believe, 5 areas that you've identified that are important to small business recovery that intersect with what townships may be able to do to help.
Thank you, Neil, and again, I appreciate the opportunity to spend a little time with you. It's actually caused me to do some thinking about what is the intersect between local government and small business at this time. Let me start with actually what I think is become clear to me is that I want to talk about your association, the Township Association. It's interesting to me that I think this is a time during a crisis of any sort where associations actually rise up in relevance, importance, the ability to speak with one voice on behalf of a constituency. I know you're doing that effectively for townships, but it really has struck us how important it is for us to be a source for our members to navigate this whole thing. Maybe let me share a little bit of some of the things we've been doing. We have 26 employees. We literally, on one day in March, on the 26th or 27th, or I'm sorry, the 16th or 17th of March, we went entirely remote. We sent all of our staff home, but all of them are focused today on helping small businesses in our state navigate this crisis. And so we focused on curating a website that is the most up-to-date website we can possibly make it for resources for small businesses, advice, direction for small businesses. So part of our staff is focused on just making sure that we've got the most recent and up-to-date information organized in a way that it could be consumed. We have set up a hotline. We've answered over 500 calls a month. We have a website address, sbam@sbam.org, where members can ask, or any small business in the state can ask questions. Another 500 questions a month there. We've done 28 webinars since we started this whole thing on separate issues of PPP to sort of navigating the executive orders as they come. We have done 66 daily briefings every day during the weekdays, and we've created template documents that have been downloaded by over 10,000 businesses. Now, I'd say that just to say we've just really focused our entire staff, our entire organization on this topic. And I also would say that to offer us as a resource to any township in the state, for the time being and for this foreseeable future, all those resources I just mentioned are available to all small businesses in our state, not just members. So you're welcome to. I brag a little bit about our website, but I really do think it's the most up-to-date, best curated, focused on small business website you're going to find. So, but your question to me was, how can townships help small businesses reopen? And my honest answer is, I don't know. I don't know nearly as much about townships as all of you do, but I know a lot about small business, and so I thought maybe I would just help you understand what I believe are the challenges that small businesses are facing today, and then maybe together we could figure out how townships can help with those things. And I will give you 5 challenges. Some of these are long-term, ongoing challenges, but a couple of them are just really current to the COVID crisis. So the first one, and maybe the most urgent one, is space. That is, currently, retail and restaurants and bars are allowed to open at 50% capacity. And I've had a number of restaurant owners in particular say to me, if you really want to lose money, open at 50% capacity. That's a really good way to go out of business. And you know, what's really, the executive order, what it really says is 50% of your internal space, but there's no limits on outside space. So we all know restaurants who make use of their rooftop or their porch. Right now, there's an urgent need for restaurants and bars in particular, but some retail as well, to be able to expand beyond their building into their parking lot, into property they own, and frankly, maybe even to property you own. That is, can you make a street available? Can you make a sidewalk available? And I would urge this to be done in a sort of blanket way. That is to say, if you could simply say until December, you don't have to have a permit, you don't have to have permission. Use your property any way you want to use your property for the time being, because I think businesses are going to have to get outside of their building to survive in many cases. They're going to have to be creative about ways to use space. And we're hearing some communities, and particularly tourism areas, who are getting creative about closing off streets where there are lots of restaurants. But I would say the problem is space, and you may be able to come up with some creative ways to help when it's the kind of business that has people come in and they can only be there at 50% capacity. The second one is cash flow. And by that I mean, right now, a lot of companies, a lot of businesses getting started again, their customers have not come back yet. And even when they have permission to open, I think we're going to have a lot of concern about people, from the customers, from the public, of coming back into those businesses, into those public spaces. And so, again, being open isn't necessarily the end of the story. It's really kind of the beginning of the story. So they've got to be able to get customers back. And I think we'll see a lot of creativity, in a marketing sense. I think a lot of small businesses are prepared to be assuring to both their employees and their customers that we've taken all the precautions, we're safe. And yet, I think there's going to be some concern. So I think anything that the local government can do to help promote we're open for business again, promote we're, weekend activities or weekend to help support local businesses. I think it's a perfect time for shop local kind of campaigns. And while we've seen these lots over the years, this may be the most compelling reason for a shop local, support your local restaurant that I've ever seen, at least in my 35 years of business advocacy. Third issue is debt. So lots of companies came into this with some debt. Certainly they have ongoing expenses. While they were shut down, they still had to pay, rent, utilities, taxes, insurance. There's a fairly long list of ongoing expenses, even though they didn't have any income. And while some of the programs that were brought to bear by the federal and state government really addressed this issue in particular, I think there's still going to be a lot of companies who are hurting as it relates to cash flow. So we have been a big proponent of the Paycheck Protection Program, or the PPP. 113,000 small businesses in our state applied for and received the PPP. It's the tool. If I were going to to direct a small business to a tool that is likely to save their business, it would be the PPP. I don't know if you remember this story, but when it first came out, passed by the Congress in the CARES Act, it was $350 billion, and it was gone in 10 days. Then they passed another $350 billion, or $300 billion, and part of that is still left. So there was so much urgency about this PPP at the very beginning, but I would say to any small business, you know, my concern is the unreached, the companies who aren't part of any club or chamber or association, who simply are unreached, who never heard of the PPP. They ought to take advantage of it right now. And so I would just say, you know, part of the what we're trying to do is get to unreached small businesses in our state and help them understand these federal resources. The state put some programs together as well. A couple of them the money was gone almost immediately, but there's one that I would point people's attention to. It's the Small Business Restart grants that now are available through the MEDC. I believe it's up to $5,000 grants. Actually, this is being talked about in the legislature as well. So I'm not sure quite how much money is going to be behind these, but if that program, when it gets stood up, and if it gets the kind of resources the legislature is talking about, I think it'll be one for small businesses to pay attention to. So, and that gets after debt and these ongoing expenses. The fourth is I would call resources, and there are lots of resources available through. I think the most available and most helpful resources in our state come through the Small Business Development Center program, which are available as part of the Small Business Administration. They have offices all over the state. They have good reach, and they have really relevant and valuable programs. And so if you only have one referral, I would make it to the SBDC for just a variety of resources available to small businesses. And they would also know all the grant programs and the sort of new programs that have been made available through the Congress and through the state. And then the fifth is strategy. And this one's a little tougher, but I really believe that what we have just seen is an earthquake that is going to change everything. And I think it's going to change everything for a lot of businesses. And a lot of companies are going to have to ask themselves, what changes in our markets? How will this change our business model? How will this change our employee model? I think it's going to change fundamentally office buildings. I don't know that we're going back to office buildings like we once did, and the building of them and maybe the repurposing of them is going to be, I think, a strategic challenge for some time to come, because I think a lot of businesses have just learned that they can work remotely and that there's some advantage to doing it. But companies are going to have to think about what does this mean to my business strategy? And in that case, we will be doing some educational programming into this space. I'm sure others will be too. And to the extent I think that local governments have economic development departments and the townships have economic development departments, I think this may be a place where convening small businesses in your community and talking about what has changed in our community and how does it impact your business and your strategy may be something to think about. Let me wrap up, Neil, with, you mentioned a economic development agenda that we have. So our economic development agenda actually came out of a task force that Neil Sheridan chaired for our organization. We've loved this term economic gardening over the years. I like it for its metaphor that it is a grow your own kind of strategy, and it's so in so many ways it's the opposite of economic development that's only focused on attraction of new businesses from outside of the community. Well, we've taken that a step further to something we call an entrepreneur-led economic development strategy. There's a package of legislation before the legislature. It, like everything else, it got slowed way down as a result of this crisis. And I'm not asking in any way for your, engagement, endorsement of our legislative package, but it seems to me that that's a common ground issue of how we grow businesses from inside our state and how we grow them inside of our communities. And we have some ideas, but we'd sure be open to your ideas as well. And I just feel like there's a great opportunity for the Small Business Association of Michigan and the Township Association to work together on a public policy agenda.
I agree, and I think that we have mutual interests that manifest themselves in policy and legislation that is mostly directed at our individual members. But I think that the success of townships and the success of small businesses in those townships have undeniable benefits to all residents, stakeholders in both groups. So thank you for laying out those 5 very clear points. I've especially appreciated your thoughts on resources. I've already seen some of our chat line folks commenting on how well organized and easy to find your website is. The other groups, we have to think very broadly when we think about the types of small businesses in Michigan. We have tech entrepreneurs in some of our townships, and we have a great broad range of businesses associated in some fashion with agriculture, with using our resources in the state, using our natural beauty and so on. So, in addition to some of the ones you mentioned, I want to remind people that 2 groups that are always at MTA expos are MDARD, the Department of Agriculture and Rural Development in Michigan, and also the U.S. one. So the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the Undersecretary is a friend for Michigan, and certainly their state director. The local chambers, you mentioned the MEDC through the SBDC. They also have the MEDC regional staff, MSU Extension. I believe that MSU's export promotion group is participating in the call today. Also a great resource for helping our companies find export markets that could be a new and valuable way for them to get out of this current situation. And then the trade associations for all of the different types of businesses in the state. As you mentioned, you're an association of associations in many ways, and those they can find some help from their specific group, whether it be dentists or innkeepers or whatever it might be. So I'd like to throw it open to our other panelists. We heard Rob define very specifically how the small businesses are going to turn to others in their community, including our township government, for help. What were your thoughts as you listened to that, Frank?
Yeah, well, yeah, it makes a lot of sense for the points that Rob made. They're universal. Some of those things are applicable to communities, whether you are 40,000 population or whether you're in a township of 3,000. So some of the things that we've done that highlight and accentuate what Rob talked about is the first thing is our signage. If you drive through Meridian Township, aesthetics and ambiance are really important. We have a very strict and restrictive sign ordinance. But one of the things that we've done over the last 2 months is really not get involved in any sort of enforcement of businesses. And this seems like maybe a trivial thing, but it hasn't been trivial in Meridian Township. We've allowed small signs to be put out in the right of way and encouraging people, hey, we're still open, those sort of things. So, and we've not gotten involved in any enforcement on that angle, and that will last for quite a while. Of course, we have election season coming up here upon us here very shortly. We're going to have to blend how we're going to handle that with the business signs. Another thing that we did for businesses and residents, but is that when the when the whole thing came out, our supervisor, Ron Steika, issued a declaration right away that we are not going to shut anyone's water off. And we actually went out and turned businesses and residents on who had, whether they had delinquent bills or not, we took care of them. We're working right now with our restaurants for outdoor service. As Rob talked about, no permitting, no cost. Tell us what you want to do. If you want to use, even if you want to use property that isn't yours, let's work together. And we have a dozen businesses here in Meridian Township that are working on this with us. And we expect to see outdoor service because, as Rob said, something I learned, I'm not a restaurant owner, never been an operator, but one thing I learned really quickly in meeting with some of our restaurant owners is we are going to be worse off opening at 50% than we were 2 weeks ago. And that took me for a minute to realize, or to digest, but it makes a lot of sense. And so from there, we started working with them. We have an economic development director and a planning office that's been very proactive and going out and meeting with our businesses to say, how can we make outdoor seating available? And the sky's the limit on how we do that. And there's some very interesting things that we're doing. And then probably one of the more important things that we did was, again, an idea that came up from 3 of our elected officials, not management. I'm not sure I would have went down this road, but it's turned out to be very, very popular and well accepted by our residents. And that is our small business grants that we've done. We combined some money from our EDC and we have some funds set aside to help development, a redevelopment fund. And the supervisor, Stika, a couple of our trustees, Dan Opsimer, and our treasurer, Phil DeShane, came together and said, let's do something. I said, you really want to do that? Yes, we want to start a small business grant program. So we worked with our EDC, our Economic Development Corporation, and we put together some funds from both sides. I know a lot of communities can't or aren't able to have the funds to do what we've done, but even a smaller example of what we did here, we were able to put together just under $200,000, and we awarded approximately 40 grants at $4,000 a piece. We had approximately 90 applications for those grant awards, and those were delivered on June 2nd. From the time the supervisor mentioned he wanted to do this to the time the checks were delivered was 13 days. And we had an entire vetting process in between. He can be a little demanding at times, but he's really great. But we turned it around in 13 days here, and I'm really proud of that. And then the final thing we did is we heard from our businesses and our residents about service. How can we, most people, if you look at polls nationally and in Michigan, 78–80% of the people still don't want to walk in buildings. And so we can talk about maybe a little later about what we've done here in Meridian to respond to that with our business owners, because permitting is very important right now. It isn't, when you think of small businesses, it isn't just the mom and pop restaurant on the corner. It's also construction workers and developers who are trying to get back in the note of doing what they do and getting projects underway. And that requires a lot of permitting. And so we've expedited our permitting process, and you don't even need to enter the building to do that. So signs and water extensions, small grant programs, restaurant, outdoor service. We're trying to do a whole lot here. And I think it's applicable to both large and small and medium-sized townships.
Yeah, Derek, before I turn to you, I just wanted to comment on that. I think you both have raised some very interesting points. And, one of the best, was this idea of opening up the land that belongs to the township, quote unquote, for more creative uses. And I was thinking beyond just the sidewalks and streets, are there public parking lots? Can you work with the school to open up the school parking lots? Can you, even if you don't have an economic development department, as most townships don't, I do think you could be creative about what you could do to promote your business's return to business. Is it possible to whip up a small taste of Smith Township, type festival? Is there a way to do some sort of gathering? You have a township hall. The sole purpose of that building initially was to convene the stakeholders and the residents of your township. Can you convene your small business owners and maybe some lenders, like your credit unions, your other small business lenders, to have, if you don't have the finances or the ability to do grants, can you do an introduction session where people can find out about non-traditional sources of capital so they can work on that debt, so they can work on that cash flow that Rob mentioned before? These are all very, I think, interesting ideas. And, my father was a restaurateur, and I certainly understand the pain of having a half-empty restaurant or bar when you're really hoping you could do more than that. And at the same time, being able to flow people out into the streets, we're a pretty hardy bunch out here, Rob. I bet they would stay out some of those bars and restaurants into December. So, Derek,
hey, by the way,
Sorry, Rob.
Let me just, one of the things on this issue of debt, a couple things happened right away when the Congress began to act. Both the federal government and the state government gave deferral to taxes. So taxes owed were deferred. And, I don't know that anybody's in a position to defer taxes. And I know state and local government are really going to be crushed by this financially. But I think if there may be some forbearance or some refinancing of tax debt. And I would say certainly right now, I'm not sure there are many small businesses who need a loan. But what they may need is a restructure of the debt that they currently have. And so that convening of small businesses with their bankers or anybody else who would be willing to think about refinancing current debt may be a real lifeline to a lot of companies.
In terms of tax forbearance, this is an issue playing out in the legislature. It's being discussed. As township officials, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our residents and stakeholders that to the greatest extent possible, we are maintaining financial order. And I know that this is something we care about passionately as township officials, and we'll see how this plays out over the next couple of months. So, Derek?
Yeah, I just had one comment on the roads. As our membership knows, unlike cities and villages, we don't have carte blanche control over those. And I would just recommend that, the supervisors or other township officials reach out to the county road directors, the MDOT TSC officials, and let them know that this is a priority for your community. And I'm sure they have permits, and tell them you want the same turnaround that you could provide locally, and just, again, continue to be an advocate for your small business community. And I think they'll respond. They just need to know that, it's something the local community wants done. So just encourage that.
So we've had a chance to hear from our different panelists, and I am looking to see whether any questions are coming in. I'm going to ask Rob, to just reflect a little bit more on the idea of strategy. And while I wait to hear a couple of questions from our participants, and I welcome you to send those via chat, what do you see for small businesses who may have inherited the business, have run it the same way for 40, 50 years, so now they've gone through this earthquake you've just mentioned? What kind of resources, what kind of guidance do you have for them in terms of re-envisioning their business model, and how do you get help doing that? I mean, most people, the extent of their management consulting is to talk to their accountant, bookkeeper, or maybe the lawyer once in a while. How do they get help sort of really looking at that afresh?
Well, there are resources obviously available to small businesses, and I mentioned the SBDC. But strategy is an interesting issue. I mean, some business owners, we always talk about sort of an entrepreneurial instinct, and in some cases, strategy comes with that entrepreneurial instinct. And there are a lot of business owners who are like, I really got to step back and rethink. I got to understand what's fundamentally changed outside of my company. What are the external things that have changed, and then begin to think about how it affects my business itself. And so, again, what just happened to retail? We've just told people stay at home, and everybody just learned how to order stuff online who didn't already know it. Amazon is the great beneficiary of that, and local retail is the great. Unfortunately, that is going to end up on the short end of that stick. How do we get that back? A lot of retailers are thinking about this right now, but that seems to me to be a fundamental shift in what has happened as a result of this. What are the other fundamental shifts? I think office workers will never come back to the downtowns of our state like they once were, and that will affect restaurants, and that will affect retail in downtown districts. So we all have to think through what's the permanent new normal, and what does that do to our strategy as a company or as a community? Because surely we're not going back to the way it was before in some pretty dramatic ways.
this idea of retail, we keep using the phrase bars and restaurants, but that's because everybody is thirsty and hungry for something besides what they're making in their own kitchen. But the retail is crushing. I personally think that we need to support those retailers, because while some of these big box operations were allowed to remain open, and I guess the rationale was that the Walmart has much more airspace, or it's less confining or less risk of transmission. Nonetheless, we really killed a lot of those small businesses by preventing people from going to them. So now the doors are being cautiously reopened through appointments and other mechanisms to maintain an orderly number of people in and out. But that really is an important change. And I think, as you've pointed out, we've just educated an entire nation on how those who could work from home, how to do your school, whether it be collegiate or primary school, high school, whatever, how to do that from home. So now we need to encourage people to re-engage socially using whichever rules are going to be enforced at whatever time we talk about. But nonetheless, I think you're right. There are permanent shifts in attitudes about how people go out and do things in our communities.
Well, and Neil, I think one of the things that became abundantly clear during this great I'm going to say experiment. I'm not criticizing whether or not, I'm not critiquing whether or not we should have done the shutdowns or as broadly as we did. I think history will help us understand that better. But I think what became abundantly clear is you can't say these industries are critical, these industries are not, and act as if they're not interdependent on one another. So supply chains, you can't say, restaurants can stay open, but people who make the styrofoam clamshells that you put to-go orders in are shut. It's too interdependent, for that kind of I don't know, just picking one and assuming it stands on its own, because businesses don't really operate that way. Very interdependent supply chain. So I think one of the things we learned is I'm doing something, actually, I don't like it when people do. I'm talking small business as if it's mostly bars, restaurants, and retail, but that's the most recent reopening, and it's what's on our mind. But small manufacturers, small service companies, big manufacturers, big service companies are all affected by this one way or another. Actually, some have really prospered. I heard someone say recently, if you're a toilet paper factory, you've done really well during this thing. But I think the reality is some businesses have really prospered, and some have really been hurt by it. And I think we're kind of in a state now where I think there are going to be some communities who are really surprised by the businesses they lose and the businesses who prosper, because there are surely going to be some closures that we didn't see coming. We're tending to think this is going to be restaurants and maybe some retail. And I think we're going to see it's all across the board, and it will surprise some people when they realize, ooh, that was all connected. If you're an ad company who brokers advertising, and for 3 months nobody advertised anything, or at least they were all trying to figure out how to be not tone deaf while they were advertising, that's an industry that just got crushed for 3 months. They're all interdependent.
This idea of the manufacturers and the supply chain, I cheered when I saw that they had been permitted to reopen. And I think they have cautiously trying to understand how to do that underneath MIOSHA and federal safety and health requirements. But, you also use the word experiment. And Frank earlier used the word the second wave. I think we're all dreading the possibility this might flare up again. But, the fact is that much of what was put into place, not just in Michigan, but nationally, was done with a lack of any very much scientific evidence as to what was going on and how fast was it spread and how fatal was it and so on. Now we know a little bit better, at least with the current strains. But I sometimes have this feeling that what we have gone through as a global community has really been practiced for the next, whether it comes out of a wet market or some sort of other source, the next more virulent strain of something. So with turning it back to our communities and our small businesses, what can you do to have a business model? I mean, we do this already. Many businesses think about, here's my business model for good times, and here's my business model for recessions. What do I do? Well, what do you do if suddenly there's word of another virus coming out? Now they're saying that they think that there's evidence that that was spreading in China in August, and that it, eventually rose to the point where people started noticing patterns of infection and mortality. So what are we going to do as a society, but what can we also do as a township, or a small business to get ourselves ready? Frank, what would you do if we had a big fall second wave emerge?
Yeah, well, and that's something we're planning for today here in Meridian Township. It's really difficult, having gone through this the last 90 to 100 days, to think about if this comes back and what do we do. But one of the things that we're working on is how can we better help businesses be prepared for it. And having those, one of those things is having that outdoor service model in place. One of the things, we had a hotline set up that came from our former communications director, Deborah Guthrie, called me and said, let's set up a hotline for residences, for businesses to call in. And so what we were able to do through that is connect a lot of our residents with our businesses. So a lot of businesses did business because our residents were calling us and telling us what they need that they can't even get out of their house. So there's a lot of different ways of trying to connect with residents, whether it's our businesses, whether it's setting up a hotline for them, whether it's providing extensions for water bills and payments that are due, which we've done here. We've extended everything by 30 days through grant programs and permitting. Permitting is another thing. We have to make sure there's no bureaucracy in place that's going to make the red tape a big toll gate for businesses to get through. We have to make sure that the open for business sign, as best we can, is out there. And whether that's use of public space, whether that's connecting residents who can't get out of their houses to the business community, we developed a very close relationship with our business community through our hotline service. I now know the owners of a lot more businesses because of it, because of some of the calls that we received from A to Z from what people needed. And we took that hotline around to 24/7. People could call in. So if it isn't relaxed signage, if it isn't use of public space, if it isn't a hotline, if it isn't extending deadlines, cutting bureaucracy for permitting, and providing an outdoor service so that people feel as healthy as they can, as safe as they can coming to our facilities. Those are all the things that we've learned from this, and we're going to be ramping up if we face round two. And no matter what size of community you are, from the population of 200 to 20,000 to 50,000, some of these things that we've discussed today can be modeled in any community. And if it comes back, as Rob said, we don't even know the real findings on our office space and businesses right now. And round two could be a real death blow to a lot of it. We have a large mall in our community, and so there's a lot of things to be concerned about. But we're trying to roll out the red carpet as best we can. And the neat thing about it is that we have the support of our residents behind us helping our businesses, and that's really important too.
Neil, I think one of the other things that, thinking about a second wave, I think the business community, all of us, were completely unprepared for our role in keeping the workplace safe. And I think we are abundantly prepared if it comes back. So we didn't know anything about how to implement social distancing inside your office. We didn't know anything about we didn't know about personal protective equipment, how to get it, where to get it, how to use it appropriately in the workplace. We didn't know anything about disinfecting surfaces and protocols, all of which businesses know about today. And I think if we come back, if a second wave of this comes back, this will be our voice, not yours, that we should not have broad-based closings of businesses. I think we should ramp back up all of the things we've learned about how to keep people safe. But the economic damage done by broad-based closures, I think we're just beginning to see what that looks like. I've been describing it as coming out when the weather clears after a hurricane. I think we don't know the damage yet. And that's something that's going to become obvious to us in the next couple of months. And if we have a second wave and we shut it all down again, I think it will be really, really devastating to businesses. A lot of them will not survive it at all. So our voice is, let's do everything we can to stop, to keep from going all the way to broad-based closures by, ramping back up and requiring these protocols to be used inside of every business, no matter what.
Well, I would just echo some of the things you said, Rob. That, local government standpoint, same kind of thing. We now have the physical barriers in place, the social distancing marks. We're ramped up now too. There was that significant learning curve that we all were scrambling for. I think business side and governmental side, and now we have those protections in place. So from that standpoint, I think we're in a better place if this fall it decides to rear its ugly head again.
I didn't mention this, but I am a resident of Meridian Township, and I know the things you're speaking of, and just in terms of the township office and the way you sort of took it to the parking lot and made people not have to come into the building, and all of the things that local government has done, just like businesses have had to do to make their workplace safe,
Yeah, maybe this would be a good time for us to, Derek and Shelley, as Rob talked about and we talked about earlier, we wanted to make our building safe for our environment, for our residents, but also our permitting. We wanted contractors to be able to get permitting in the parking lot, not even have to come in, get your permits, and get back to work and getting our businesses going. And so we set up an outdoor service that 100% of our residents can be serviced outside. Maybe this is a good time to go there, Derek.
Sure. Let me see if I can pull those up. So yeah, this is an image of our 8x8 exterior office. We call them pods, affectionately, and we have two of them. So one is for your tax bills, water bills, other payments you need to make, drop off your absentee ballots, and then we have another one that's pretty much set up for permitting. So if you want to get your roof done, or your small business needs a permit, you can just step right up and be served by one of our dedicated employees. It's got AC, it's got a heat strip, so this fall, if we need to go into the cooler weather, they're open and available. And then, like I'm sure most other townships have done, inside our building, we did the sneeze guard, so if customers do come within the building, our employees are safe. The markings on the floor. We got the sanitizer stations throughout the building. So again, if it happens in the fall, I think we're ready from that standpoint.
Yeah, and our business community has absolutely loved the outdoor permitting that we're doing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Derek.
Yeah.
I agree. So I hope you can hear me again.
Yes, better.
Oh, good. So I just want to tell you that the reason why I disappeared for a few moments is that I got a message on the little Wi-Fi router we have to use here in the rural countryside, and it said, too hot. So it shut itself down. So we have, our conversation was too hot for my Wi-Fi router. I think that the sharing that we've had this morning has been very useful. And I know that we'll make this available as a recorded podcast, but I note that we saw one question. I'm not sure whether we answered it or not. But Rob, did we have a question about development in the communities being impacted by COVID?
I'm not sure. What is the question exactly, Neil?
Okay. I'm going to repeat the question that was asked. I thought it was very worthwhile. So Deborah Guthrie had stated that many people in our community are concerned about areas of the township that were in the process of being developed and now feel that those will not occur, and small businesses may pull out of the current climate due to the current climate with COVID. How can townships assist in this area, if at all? So when I hear that question, I think of reassuring and also waiting to see what happens. I think that there's going to be great interest in some townships in the state for people looking to change the business model, but also change where they're doing business.
Well, I do think it's a good question. I don't have the answer to it, but I've been jokingly saying if you have investments in office buildings, I think I'd rethink those investments right now. I think office, so if there are office, small or large, on the horizon, I would expect many of those to be rethought. I do think we may see some real pulling back until people understand what the future is going to look like and how we come out of this, of those projects that may be six months and further out before starting. So, I think it's going to have a chilling effect on a lot of development. I hope that, there'll be signs in the economy that, even the 2.5 million new jobs, that was a big surprise to our nation. And I don't know how real that is, have we hit the bottom? Is that a sign that we're headed back in the right direction? Those are all the things that I think a lot of businesses will be sort of reading the tea leaves and trying to understand what's the, are we coming back strong? And if we are, then I'm in. But I think there'll be some trepidation about investment. I think there'll be trepidation about putting a lot of time and energy into a space that is pretty well unknown at the moment.
Frank, what are your thoughts? You've got several developments currently underway. Is there a hint that there's a risk there?
Yes and no. We have probably 6 to 8 mid to major developments in the community, and I would say right now, if there's 8, 7 of them look like they're going forward, and one of them in an area that has been in need of development up in the northern part of our community for approximately a decade. So we're seeing great development going on in the township. And our permitting has been really accelerated here in the past few weeks. I think it's going to require, though, Rob and Neil, it's going to require communities to think more about density limitations, height limitations, impervious, all the issues that come up in development, but also funding mechanisms like brownfields and DDA tax districts, TIFA, tax increment financing. All of the things that maybe some communities maybe tend to shy away from, we all might have to rethink those mechanisms that are available there to us in order to spur development. We might have to do more than what we've done in the past. Signage is another issue, and that's a non-starter in Meridian Township, but others are going to have to think about their signage and how it impacts others.
So we have a new question. So we've heard a lot about different groups trying to help small businesses. One of the groups we're curious about is, it'd be interesting to hear it from both of your sides. Rob, are you hearing about landlords making concessions to small businesses with rent or space or what have you, as they've been asked to do to help residents or homeowners or home occupants rather? Are you seeing small business lease issues appear and how they are being addressed?
Yes. So it's been interesting. The Paycheck Protection Program that I mentioned earlier actually allows rent and utilities to be part of what you pay with the PPP and get forgiveness of. Therefore, it turns into a grant. So the beautiful part about the PPP is it ultimately is a grant if you spend it properly. And one of the ways you can spend it is rent and utilities. So it's taken some of the pressure off of that. But the PPP was designed for 8 weeks. And the truth is this has really gone longer. It's just recently got an extension. But I think that's coming. That's the issue that we're about to see rather than the one we're seeing right now. So companies that really haven't been able to pay their expenses is probably the next 8 weeks more than it is the past 8 weeks. And but I think we have seen a lot of a lot of building owners who realize their tenants are under a lot of stress. If the economy comes back quickly, there would be no reason not to give them forbearance and assume that they would be back and good for it. But there's upstream from building owners. That's their debt, and so as long as we have the ability to refinance and reasonable forbearance, I think building owners are going to be very willing to work with their tenants, not because they're forced to, but because it's good business.
Yeah, and they want to keep them. It's better to keep the building occupied, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rob. Thank you, Frank and Derek, for participating in today's discussion. Again, there will be more resources on our website. We've been invited to go to the sbam.org website for access to the collection of small business tools there. As Rob mentioned, we have the small business development centers here in the state of Michigan and many other sources of guidance specific to a type of business. We look forward to, Rob is going to contribute an article with his SBAM president, Brian Calley, our former lieutenant governor, for next month's magazine. In the meantime, if you have any further questions on this topic, please do send them in to us, and we will look to get them before our panelists or from our MIS or other experts who may be able to assist you as you try to help our small businesses recover. Thank you very much for listening and participating in today's webinar. And again, MTA is committed to strong local control. It is probably the best way that we can help our communities survive and conquer this disease and its impacts on our residents, our stakeholders, and our small business owners. Rob, Frank, Derek, thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.